It pleased Darius to appoint 120 satraps to rule throughout the kingdom, with 3 administrators over them, one of whom was Daniel. The satraps were made accountable to them so that the king might not suffer loss. Now Daniel so distinguished himself among the administrators and the satraps by his exceptional qualities that the king planned to set him over the whole kingdom. At this, the administrators and the satraps tried to find grounds for charges against Daniel in his conduct of government affairs, but they were unable to do so. They could find no corruption in him because he was trustworthy and neither corrupt nor negligent. Finally, these men said,
"We will never find any basis for charges against this man Daniel unless it has something to do with the law of his God."
So these administrators and satraps went as a group to the king and said,
"May King Darius live forever. The royal administrators, prefects, satraps, advisors, and governors have all agreed that the king should issue an edict and enforce the decree that anyone who prays to any god or human being during the next 30 days, except to you, your majesty, shall be thrown into the lion's den. Now, your majesty, issue the decree and put it in writing so that it cannot be altered, in accordance with the law of the Medes and Persians, which cannot be repealed."
So King Darius put the decree in writing. Now when Daniel learned that the decree had been published, he went home to his upstairs room where the windows opened toward Jerusalem. 3 times a day he got down on his knees and prayed, giving thanks to his God, just as he had done before. Then these men went as a group, found Daniel praying and asking God for help. So they went to the king and spoke to him about his royal decree.
"Did you not publish a decree that during the next 30 days, anyone who prays to any god or human being except to you, your majesty, would be thrown into the lion's den?"
The king answered,
"The decree stands in accordance with the law of the Medes and Persians, which cannot be repealed."
Then they said to the king,
"Daniel, who is one of the exiles from Judah, pays no attention to you, your majesty, or to the decree you put in writing. He still prays 3 times a day."
When the king heard this, he was greatly distressed. He was determined to rescue Daniel and made every effort until sundown to save him. Then the men went as a group to King Darius and said to him,
"Remember, your majesty, that according to the law of the Medes and Persians, no decree or edict that the king issues can be changed."
So the king gave order, and they brought Daniel and threw him into the lion's den. The king said to Daniel,
"May your God, whom you serve continually, rescue you."
A stone was brought and placed over the mouth of the den, and the king sealed it with his own signet ring and with the rings of his nobles, so that Daniel's situation might not be changed. Then the king returned to his palace and spent the night without eating and without any entertainment being brought to him, and he could not sleep. At the first light of dawn, the king got up and hurried to the lion's den. When he came near the den, he called out to Daniel in an anguished voice,
"Daniel, servant of the living God, has your God, whom you continually serve, been able to rescue you from the lions?"
Daniel answered,
"May the king live forever. My God sent his angel and he shut the mouths of the lions. They have not hurt me because I was found innocent in his sight, nor have I ever done any wrong before you, your majesty."
The king was overjoyed and gave orders to lift Daniel out of the den. And when Daniel was lifted from the den, no wound was found on him because he had trusted in his God. At the king's command, the men who had falsely accused Daniel were brought in and thrown into the lion's den, along with their wives and children. And before they reached the floor of the den, the lions overpowered them and crushed all their bones. Then King Darius wrote to all the nations and peoples of every language in all the earth,
"May you prosper greatly. I issue a decree that in every part of my kingdom, people must fear and reverence the God of Daniel, for he is the living God and he endures forever. His kingdom will not be destroyed. His dominion will never end. He rescues and he saves. He performs signs and wonders in the heavens and on the earth. He has rescued Daniel from the power of the lions.
So Daniel prospered during the reign of Darius and the reign of Cyrus the Persian.
Jan van Kyk was a Dutch man who lived in the 16th century. And like many in those early years after the Reformation, he heard the biblical gospel and it changed his life. He discovered relationship with God through Jesus by faith. He discovered it and it changed his life. It turned his life upside down. It became so precious to him. And he depicted this new faith in art. He was an artist. But the Roman Catholic authorities wanted him to renounce his faith and they arrested him. They tortured him. And through the torture, the days, the weeks of torture, they offered him his freedom, provided he would renounce his faith. But Van Kyk refused. Finally, he was put on trial, and the official said to him, "Don't you want to live?" And Jan answered, "Sure I do, but not for anything in the world would I renounce my faith." Well, the trial was finished, and Jan van Kyk was burned at the stake. How would you go in that situation? If your life was on the line and someone said to you, renounce your faith, stop worshipping God, stop obeying him, stop sharing the gospel, stop praying, or you die, how would you go in that situation? See, we all hope that we'd prove faithful, right? We all hope that no matter what, we'd keep trusting God, no matter what the threats, what the pressure. Maybe you and I will never have it put to us quite so starkly, abandon Jesus or die. Maybe we will, but even if we don't, we all face this same basic choice that Van Kyk faced. We face it every day, over and over again. It's a choice between trusting God and obeying human commands. This choice, it's a choice between trusting God and giving in to human pressure. I don't know whether you or I will ever find ourselves in a torture chamber for our faith like Van Kyk did, but we all face pressure to renounce our faith, to deny it, to hold back from fully living it out. A friend tells you that you shouldn't give up your career and go to Bible college. An uncle tells you not to take your family to that unsafe developing country to become a missionary. A financial advisor tells you that you shouldn't give so much money away. A newspaper columnist tells you that you have no right to share your faith with others. A government tells you that Christianity is illegal and you can't gather to worship. It comes in a myriad of different forms, doesn't it? But we all face pressure daily to not live for God, not obey him, not trust him. How do we resist? How do we resist that pressure and live lives of trust? How do we learn to join with Peter, who in Acts 5 said to the authorities who were trying to silence him, "We must obey God rather than human beings"? How can we trust God under pressure? That's our question today. How can we trust God under pressure? Daniel 6 teaches us how. Daniel chapter 6 equips us for this task. See, in Daniel chapter 6, Daniel has to make a choice. It's a choice between trusting God and obeying a human command. Daniel has the same kind of stark choice that Van Kyk had. Pray to God and die, or pray to King Darius and live. And through the course of this chapter, the narrator doesn't just show us that Daniel chose to trust God, but he shows us how Daniel did it. And by doing so, he equips us to as well. He equips us to trust God, even when we're under pressure. Well, let's dive into this story. So we're in Daniel chapter 6. We're still in Babylon, as we have been ever since chapter 1, but things have changed. The proud Belshazzar, brought to us by Anthony last week, he's gone, he's dead. The Persians have taken over, and now King Darius of Persia is setting up his government. And that's where our story starts, because the way he's setting it up, Daniel is one of his 3 chief ministers. And because Daniel does such a great job, the king takes notice and wants to promote Daniel. But promotion for Daniel is going to mean demotion for others. So they, in their jealousy, they look for a way to bring him down. First, they try to find fault with the way he's doing his job. But they've got nothing. He's not corrupt, he's not negligent, he's faithful, he's trustworthy. But then they have an idea. Verse 5. We will never find any basis for charges against this man Daniel unless it has something to do with the law of his God. That's how they're going to bring him down. The law of his God. Now take note of that phrase, the law of his God. It's going to become a crucial theme in this chapter. So the conspirators, they go to the king with their plan. Verse 7, have a look, verse 7. The royal administrators, prefects, satraps, advisors and governors have all agreed, they say, that the king should issue an edict and enforce the decree that anyone who prays to any god or human being during the next 30 days, except to you, your majesty, shall be thrown into the lion's den. So here's the trap. Convince the king to make a law that Daniel is bound to break. And to make it watertight, they need to get this new law in writing. Verse 8. Now, your majesty, issue the decree and put it in writing so that it cannot be altered, in accordance with the law of the Medes and Persians, which cannot be repealed. So King Darius put the decree in writing. The king has taken the bait and the trap is laid. Which means Daniel is going to have a choice, isn't he? Pray to God or pray to Darius. Obey the law of God, which says worship God alone, or obey the law of the Medes and Persians. You see, it's a choice between 2 rulers, God and Darius. It's a choice between 2 sets of laws, the law of God and a law made by a man. 2 rulers, 2 laws. Which will Daniel trust and obey? It's not going to be easy for Daniel to say no to Darius and his law. I mean, just think about the situation that Daniel finds himself in, this imposing situation. See, Darius is the king of this new, powerful empire, and his laws are immutable. They can't be changed. We saw that in verse 8, didn't we? And not only that, but this law, it comes with the death penalty. Break it and you're thrown to the lions. This is the imposing situation before Daniel. All-powerful king, an immutable law, and a horrible, violent execution awaiting. Daniel has to choose between 2 rulers, between 2 laws, and it's Darius's human-made laws that seem really imposing right now. Do you feel that way too about the human-made laws pressuring you not to trust God? The things people say, the pressures they exert, telling you, persuading you, pushing you not to trust God, not to worship him, not to pray, not to sacrifice your life for Christ, not to walk that harder but better road, not to lay down your lives in the service of others. Do these human-made laws, these human voices, do they feel imposing to you? The laws of the Medes and Persians of our day. Immutable, powerful, punishable by death, irresistible. Is that how they feel? Well, let's see how Daniel goes with this imposing situation. Verse 10, we'll keep reading. Now, when Daniel learned that the decree had been published, he went home to his upstairs room where the windows opened toward Jerusalem. 3 times a day, he got down on his knees and prayed, giving thanks to his God, just as he had done before. It's quite something, isn't it? Daniel knows the decree. He knows the death penalty looms. He knows that the laws can't be changed. And yet when he's given this choice between praying to God and praying to Darius, when he's given this choice between obeying the laws of God and the laws of the Medes and the Persians, he chooses God. He's willing to die for God. He'd rather be thrown into a pit of lions than change his habit of praying to God. I mean, this is an incredibly stressful situation for him, isn't it? I mean, if anything was going to cause anxiety, surely this would. But Daniel's unflinching. Doesn't lose sleep. He doesn't go off his food. He doesn't try to use his power to lobby the king or change the law. He doesn't complain that it's unfair. He just goes and does what he has always done. He gets down on his knees and he prays. This is incredible courage. It's incredible trust. I think this is a really attractive picture of trust, don't you? Don't you want to be like that? Facing your problems, your crises, your pressures with this kind of calm, confident trust. How does Daniel do it? How does he? How can we trust God under pressure? Well, let's keep following the story. Next, Daniel's enemies catch him breaking the law. They catch him praying to God. And then they go back to the king and they dob Daniel in. And King Darius is distraught, isn't he? Verse 14. Have a look. When the king heard this, that is, that Daniel had been caught by the law, he was greatly distressed. He was determined to rescue Daniel and made every effort until sundown to save him. See, don't forget, Darius thinks Daniel is fabulous. He wants to promote Daniel to the highest office in the land. Darius didn't want this. He didn't intend for this. This has all gone wrong. So now this powerful decree-making king switches into rescuer mode. He wants to rescue Daniel. He makes every effort until sundown, which is when the execution must happen, to save him. But the question is, will he be able to? Will the king who wants with all his heart to rescue Daniel, will he be able to? Daniel has had to make a choice in this chapter, hasn't he? Between God and Darius, between God's law and between human-made law. And what the narrator is doing is he's framing this narrative as a contest. That's what we're watching unfold here. It's a contest between God and Darius. Who's the better ruler? Who makes the better laws? Who is the better rescuer? These are the criteria for deciding the winner. Who's the better ruler? Who's the more powerful one? Who's the one who's able to bring about his will and purposes? Who makes the better laws? Good laws, just laws, lasting, immutable laws. And who's the better rescuer? Who is going to be able to save Daniel? That's what we've got here. It's a contest between God and Darius. When we've got a choice in life between two options, which one do we usually pick? We pick the better one, don't we? If you're shopping and you're choosing a product, if you're sick and you're choosing between doctors, we choose the better one. When it comes to trusting God, sometimes we might make it more complex and mystical than it needs to be. The way the narrator is helping us to understand what trust is here, he's showing us that it's just about making the logical, obvious choice. When we've got to choose who to trust, we choose the better one, the better ruler with better laws, the better rescuer. And the question in this narrative is, who is it? Is it God or is it Darius? Who is emerging as the winner of this contest? Well, at the end of verse 14, what we have is a picture of the mighty King Darius, the most powerful man on earth, and he's desperate to save Daniel, to rescue Daniel. But he can't. He can't. Verse 15, the conspirators say to the king, "Remember, your majesty, that according to the law of the Medes and Persians, no decree or edict that the king issues can be changed." The king wants to rescue Daniel, but he can't. He's trapped by the very law that he made. In this contest between God and Darius, Darius's massive shortcomings are coming to the surface here. He's a hopeless ruler. He's so far from being in control that he gets trapped by his own laws. And he makes terrible laws, immoral laws, laws that bind him, laws that go against his own will. And he's an incompetent rescuer. Despite his best efforts, he can't save Daniel. It's a pathetic picture. The king who was happy with the idea that everyone in the land would pray to him, the king who was happy to accept semi-divine status, to put himself forward as a competitor to God, this king turns out just to be a gullible mortal. His own officials have tricked him. His own law has trapped him. He's not a competitor with God. He's a puppet who can't rule and can't rescue. In the contest between God and Darius, it's a no contest. It's a humiliating defeat. In fact, just have a look at what the defeated Darius says in the next verse, verse 16. So the king gave the order, and they brought Daniel and threw him into the lion's den. The king said to Daniel, "May your God, whom you continually serve, rescue you." See, Darius is waving the white flag here. May your God rescue you. I can't. I'm out of options. My hands are tied. I can't do it. Now, I can only hope that your God can. I can only hope that your decision to continually serve him will prove well-founded. I can only hope that he is a better rescuer than me. By this stage, I reckon the narrator is just having some fun now. Having fun depicting the impotence of Darius. Do you remember, by contrast, how calm and trusting Daniel was when the crisis came? Not so with Darius here. Darius spends the night in fitful anxiety. Verse 18. Then the king returned to his palace and spent the night without eating and without any entertainment being brought to him. And he could not sleep. This would-be God, the one who demanded that all pray to him, is powerless. He can't sleep. He's trapped by his own laws. He's not being prayed to anymore. He's praying to God, hoping that God might save Daniel. This contest between God and Darius is a no contest. Last night I was preparing PowerPoint slides for this talk, sitting on the lounge room couch, and my son Liam came along and had a look and said, he read the heading, "A Contest, God versus Darius," and he laughed. He laughed. He said, "That's obvious, Dad. I don't even know who Darius is, but it's obvious who wins that one." Well, the next morning, King Darius hurries to the den. He's a king, but he's anxiously hurrying, undignifiedly hurrying. And then he calls out, not in a calm, authoritative voice of a king, but in an anguished voice. "Daniel," verse 20, "Daniel, servant of the living God, has your God, whom you serve continually, been able to rescue you from the lions?" The anxious, hurried, anguished, impotent Darius has failed as a rescuer. But the question is, what about God? Has he proved to be able? And the answer comes in verse 22 when Daniel replies, "My God sent his angel, and he shut the mouths of the lions." God has done it. What Darius was unable to do, God has done. He's rescued Daniel. He's shut the mouths of the lions. He's shown himself to be the better rescuer. Not just better, the ultimate, perfect, all-competent rescuer. And the next verse, verse 23, is a really key verse. Because in this verse, the narrator tells us what this whole story has been about. Trust. Have a look with me, verse 23. When Daniel was lifted from the den, no wound was found on him, because he had trusted in his God. The choice that Daniel has had here between praying to God and praying to Darius, it's all been about trust. When Daniel sat in that window and prayed, knowing that the death penalty awaited, that was all about trust. Daniel trusted in his God. And the question that we've been asking today is how? How was he able to do that? It turns out the answer is quite simple. He was able to do it because he knew what God is like. He knew what the narrator in this story is showing us. That God is the better ruler, the sovereign ruler. That God makes the better laws, perfect laws. And that God is the better rescuer, an all-competent rescuer. That's why Daniel was able to trust God. That's why we are able to trust God when we're under pressure too, because we know that this contest between God and whatever human is pressuring us, it's really a no contest at all. God is the perfect ruler. He makes the perfect laws, and he's the perfect rescuer. And that's what Darius, the one who wanted to compete with God at the start of the chapter, it's what Darius has now learned. Have a look at the decree that he issues at the end of this chapter. Verse 26. I issue a decree that in every part of my kingdom, people must fear and reverence the God of Daniel. It's very ironic, isn't it? Just a little earlier, he'd issued another decree. Everyone must pray to me. But now in this second decree, it's flipped, isn't it? Everyone must fear the God of Daniel. But hang on, how can he do that? What about the fact that the laws of the Medes and Persians are supposed to be immutable and unchangeable? What's happened to that first decree? Hasn't this second decree just nullified the first one? Well, it turns out that the laws of the Medes and Persians aren't quite as immutable and unchangeable as we thought. No, they're not the ones that are immutable and unchangeable. It's God's laws that are. It's not the laws of the Medes and the Persians that are ultimately controlling everything that's happening. It's God's laws. God is the sovereign ruler. God makes perfect laws. And God is the all-competent rescuer. And that's what Darius acknowledges in the remainder of the decree. The second half of verse 26, he says, for he is the living God, and he endures forever. His kingdom will not be destroyed. His dominion will never end. He rescues and he saves. He performs signs and wonders in the heavens and on the earth. He has rescued Daniel from the power of the lions. See, this is just astonishing, isn't it? Out of the mouth of the would-be God substitute, we learn why it is that we can trust God. It's because he's the sovereign ruler, the living God, powerful and active. It's because he makes perfect laws, eternal, immutable ones. His dominion will never end. And it's because he is an all-competent rescuer. He has saved Daniel. He rescues and saves. How can we trust God under pressure? Because he's worth trusting. He's better. He's best. Ruler, lawmaker, rescuer, it's a no contest. Why would we choose any alternative? Why would we put our trust in anyone or anything else? I want us to think a little bit deeper about God as rescuer. See, if God is the perfect, all-competent rescuer, does that mean that he'll always rescue us from the peril that we face when we trust him? Well, he didn't with Jan van Kyk. He was tortured. He was executed. So what does that mean for God as the all-competent rescuer? Is he only a rescuer sometimes? Because if that's the case, it makes it a bit harder to trust, doesn't it? I want us to notice one more little detail from the story in Daniel 6. When Daniel went to his upstairs room and he prayed, do you remember which direction he faced when he prayed? It was towards Jerusalem, wasn't it? And do you know why he faced towards Jerusalem when he prayed? It's because of his hope in God's promises. You see, Daniel didn't know if he'd be rescued from the lions because he'd never had a promise that he would be. But he did know that God had promised to rescue his people from exile and take them back to Jerusalem. And he showed his hope in that promise, his trust in that promise, by praying facing in that direction towards Jerusalem. Daniel didn't know if he'd be rescued from the lions, no, but he did know that God had promised a Messiah who would one day establish God's perfect, eternal kingdom. And so Daniel showed his faith in that promise by facing towards Jerusalem. See, Daniel is a model for us. When you and I, when we step out in risky, dangerous trust, we don't know if God's going to rescue us from the peril that we will find ourselves in. He might, he's certainly able, but we don't know. There's no specific promise there. We might end up like Van Kyk. We might end up like many of our Christian brothers and sisters through the centuries before us who've suffered, who've died for Christ. We don't know if he'll save us from the peril now, but we do know that he's promised and sent the Messiah, Jesus. We do know that the ultimate eternal rescue is assured. So when we trust God as rescuer, what we're doing is we're trusting him as the one who is able to rescue now and who most certainly will rescue us through Jesus then. He's able now, he will then. How can we trust God under pressure? How can we learn to say with Peter, we must obey God rather than human beings? How can we learn to say with Jan van Kyk, not for anything in the world would I renounce my faith? How can we do that? Well, we learn to from the book of Daniel. We learn to by grasping from the book of Daniel what God is like. Sovereign ruler, perfect lawmaker, all-competent rescuer. He's worthy of our trust. See, we learn it from the book of Daniel, and in fact, that's where Van Kyk learned it from too. Van Kyk wrote letters from the prison where he was tortured to his family. Just have a listen to what he wrote. In one letter, after describing the different ways in which he and his fellow prisoner were being tortured, he writes this: "After the suffering, I received great joy of the Holy Spirit. Yes, I wept for joy because he had kept our lips and did not suffer us to be tempted above what we were able to bear. I will rather go with Daniel to the lion's den than that I should kneel down before wood, stone, gold, silver, bread, wine, or oil. I'd rather go with Daniel to the lion's den." See, Van Kyk learned this trust in God from the book of Daniel, and we can too. Last week, the Taliban took over Afghanistan, making Afghanistan one more country in a long list of countries around the world where the force of law is used to stop Christians from worshipping God. See, those human Taliban rulers and their human-made laws, they would seem pretty imposing right now if you were a Christian living in Afghanistan. They'd seem immutable, powerful, in control. They're not. God is. This week across Sydney, millions of Sydney-siders are under lockdown pressure, losing jobs, feeling financial strain, missing human connection. And under pressure, many are turning to God substitutes, God alternatives, alcohol, addictions, food, unhealthy entertainments. Wherever we are, whether it's Taliban-controlled Afghanistan or COVID-controlled Sydney, wherever we are and whatever the pressures that we're under, God is the sovereign ruler. He's the perfect lawmaker. He's the all-competent rescuer. Let's live courageous, hope-filled, mission-driven lives of trust. Let's pray. Dear God, Almighty God, sovereign ruler, perfect lawmaker whose dominion is eternal, gracious, all-competent rescuer who saved Daniel and who saves us through Jesus. May we never lose sight of who you are, and may knowing who you are, equip us always to live lives of trust. For your sake and in your name we pray. Amen.